Hey guys, welcome back to another episode here at Garage Time TV. We are actually taking a break this week, next 2 weeks, from our 1974 Volkswagen bus build and actually jumping back on our 1982 Fiat 124 Spider. Now, we completed this project probably 5-6 months ago now, but there's an entire series on this build. So if you've not seen that series, I'll make sure to drop a link up above for that so you get you guys caught up, see some of the highlights of it, some of the lows where we actually had a lot of disaster strike on us, but it actually ended up coming together pretty well. But we just crossed the 1,000-mile mark on this build over these past 6 months. We're actually at 1,082 miles to be specific, and we've been driving it, hence hitting the 1,000-mile mark. But we want to do a checkup on this. I've actually just dropped the oil on it and done a nice oil change, and I was getting ready to dispose of it, and I thought, well, maybe people want to see what's going on with this build that have been following it for a while. And if you have not been following this, you've actually been following the bus series. This was one of the first projects. But we've got that oil up on the bench. We actually just replaced it, new filter, all that stuff. We've got the filter up there, so I think it'd be a good time to cut into the filter, take a look at it, run our fingers through that oil, see if we see any glitter or anything like that, to see the health of this engine after 1,000 miles. Now, we did an initial break-in to get that cam lubed up, but I want to do a couple other things. We'll check that oil, check that filter, see if we find any silver or debris or anything like that from our bearings, which I don't think we're going to. But then we're also going to do another check. We'll check our valves, make sure those are all still set okay. Now, you should be checking the valves when the engine is warm, so that everything kind of expands to get a true reading. But I just want to do a reading of where we're at with those valve and our gap there. Another couple thing is it's really dusty and dirty from sitting in the garage. And we have the Vick Auto Open House next weekend. So the weekend of April 29th, 2023 is actually the day of the open house. Now, this video is going to come out the weekend before, so it'll be Friday or Saturday, depending when this gets edited and the kind of things we run into. But this will be edited and put up there ready for that. Now, at the open house, we won't be having a video that week, but we will be doing a live stream from the open house where there's going to be all sorts of Fiat groups there and Alfa Romeos, things like that. We'll be there, and I want to show you guys how it goes. We did post a video from the last year's event. If you haven't seen that, I'll make sure to post that as well. But we're going to do a live stream so that you guys can get involved. So I'll make sure to be posting throughout the week as reminders that live stream will be going on at the open house. There's going to be clubs from the Dallas group, the Austin group I think is going to show up, some few members of the Houston group are going to show up, maybe even some from Louisiana are going to be coming into town. So there should be a good number of Fiats. We'll go take a look around, about a 30-minute live stream, talk to Matt and the team there at Vick's and some of the things that they offer. So anyway, that's going on next weekend, and this is in preparation of that because we are going to drive this all the way to Dallas from my town of Houston. So it's going to take us about 3 hours. It's going to be a 3-hour road trip, so it's going to be a good checkup to see the health of our build after that 1,000 miles and do some system checks for the road trip up there. We did just get new tires, nice new tires, and they are fantastic. Hand-cooked tires, and we'll get into all that. We'll probably clean it. I thought about maybe even doing a wet sand on some of this because a lot of these areas are still pretty rough from our buffing of it, which seems forever ago. But anyway, I've been rambling, I've been talking. Lots going on this week, next week at the open house. Let's get to the bench where I've got the oil. We'll start doing some evaluations and start doing some checks on our Fiat here so we can get up to Dallas in one piece. Alright, so I do have the fan on. It's a little humid in here today, so that's what some of the noise you may be hearing in the background is my fan down here. But this is some of the oil. I started to dump it, like I said, and I just wanted to be like, wait, you guys might want to see this. So 1,000 miles, 1,082, and we want to stir this up. It's settled just a little bit, but the good thing is it's a little discoloration. Could have been some of the residue left over in the oil pan from some other stuff, but what's good is I don't see any glitter, anything like that. A little bit of discoloration, but again, those bearings, good viscosity on the oil too, not super runny or anything like that. So it's good. But again, those bearings are brand new. We did the break-in process. So a little of this discoloration you see here is probably from that as well. Those bearings just really working their way in and settling in, but I don't see anything crazy glittery there. So the next spot we're going to check is actually, put that over there, don't fall in, thank you, is our old filter. Now, I kind of boogered it up when I was pulling it off. So we're going to open this up and go through the fins of the filter and see how that looks. And there actually is a tool where you can open the filter like a soda can, basically, where it'll go on top, cut off this top lip that goes around here, and it'll actually remove it. But we don't have that luxury because we don't race our cars. So we're gonna go the really old crude way, empty out some of this last bit of oil here. And I'm just gonna start cutting into it on the top, try and get this element exposed. Now what we could do, which actually I may end up doing, is just take the grinder and just cut that top off. Just Hercules that off, and then we should be able to pull it out, which I think is just gonna be easier. There. After much work, finally came out. But what I want to do is kind of look through these fins and see if there's any metal chunks or anything like that. But the good thing is I'm going through these fins, I'm not seeing anything. So it's a really good sign. We don't have you know, a lot of debris coming off our crankshaft or anything like that, and just some dirty oil. So good. Our fins look really good. Just a little bit, kind of see it there, just a little bit. But again, that's what this filter's for, which is good. So that means the filter worked and we didn't end up seeing it in our oil. It all got caught in here, just a little bit. But again, that, yeah, that's good. Good shot right there for you. Is oh, it's just a little bit of that's coming off, but no metal chunks or anything like that. Even with got in there cutting, but it popped right out. Those internals, and again, like I said, we already replaced that oil. Done with that. All right. On jack stands, we're gonna grab our creeper here, make it a little bit easier to roll around. I think to open up the transmission, but before we do that, let's go underneath, take a look how things are going. We'll start in the front. All right, get underneath here. So it looks like we got a little tear right there. See if I can turn the wheels here. Little tear there. Yeah, look at that. So that's got to be replaced. No big deal, we can do that. Yeah, it seems like it's interesting how it's always on that one side. On just the ones that face, that have the nuts on the outside. So something that's got to be replaced. Unbolt there, and it should, with the drive shaft on the back side there, should be able to pull this back and drop the carrier bearing and replace that. That's interesting. But this is brand new, relatively brand new, but I guess 1,000 miles now. I'll probably put it in a little crooked, knowing me. Probably should grease this up as well. These, if you guys would look up, here you go. I grease that as well. And so if we look here, it looks like we're getting a little bit of a rear output seal. Probably needs to be replaced. Thrown up oil and dirt and stuff, and I can feel it there. So that's one thing that's got to get addressed. Let's look on the back side of our flex joint here. Interesting. The crack is on all the nut side of these. Another one there. There's one there. So that's something we've got to take a look at. Looks like we got some oil here on our speedo drive. So this is probably where our oil is coming from. It's dripping down and getting flung up. On the other side is our drive. So that's something we got to address. Not a big deal. And come this way, got just a little bit of seepage on the bolts. Looks like that's still running down on there. And some here. So there's a small rear output seal on our drive's transmission. Rear output seal up here is leaking. And maybe a little bit around our speedo as well. So move forward, ground strap is still set. Our steering linkages all look good. Looks good. Rubber lines look okay. Coming this way. Other side. Looks good. Looks good. Rubber line looks okay. Ball joints look okay. Probably need to grease up them a little bit. Probably wouldn't hurt. Steering idler looks okay. Steering box here isn't leaking, so that's a good sign. You know, otherwise it looks good. Our control arm bush is great. Shocks look good. There looks okay. Control arm bushings look okay is there too. So far, as I rest my head here, looks like we've got our flex joint needs to be replaced. Those rips are pretty intense because when that breaks, it's a loud bang and you're gonna know it. So we definitely need to replace that. It looks like we also need a gasket for our speedo because that's leaking, which means that it's got oil in it. You know, if it's leaking oil, it's got oil. Let's go this way, bring it all back in. So here, looks like nice new U-joints that we installed. Also got all the pins, looking good. And we'll go down this way. Looks like we got a little bit of wetness here. Don't know what that's for. Looks like we're probably leaking a little bit here. How's our rear U-joint look? Nice and tight. Looks great. Okay. We can probably check our rear diff fluid, so we'll pop this and look at that. Oh, well, that's a little concerning. I don't know when that happened, but it looks like the nut came off this bolt. So we'll need to get that replaced. Let's put a bolt on there. How does everything else look? Well, we definitely need to replace this. I totally forgot about this. Got to replace that because that's on the verge of falling off. So we got to get something rigged up for that because that's definitely going to fall on us. And don't mind all this. Just look at the main part of it. Don't acknowledge that. It's held for 1,000 miles. You know, zip ties on that. But we definitely got to get a bolt on there. Check our diff fluid. That's a bolt. That's good. Shocks are still good. Bolt looks good. Rubber line looks good. Rubber line looks good. That may need to be tightened up just a little bit on the shock. But otherwise, when you just don't look at this, we're just going to skip over that and go this way. It just seems like we got to spray some paint on that because that's going to rust again. But otherwise, looks pretty good. Just do a fluid check, put a bolt, that bolt, and it looks good under here. Nothing too serious, just got to get that flex joint looked at. Not bad. Let's move to the engine bay. The next thing we're going to be working on is the engine bay. So we did just do an oil change, so I know our oil level is nice and high, all taken care of. One thing we do want to check is our brake fluid reservoir. We want to make sure that that brake fluid has a still nice yellowy clear color to it, which it does. It's a little dark, so they're suggesting a little bit of moisture got in there, but that would make sense with that little leak we saw by the rear diff. So that is all good, nice topped off level. Oil level is good. One thing I do want to check is make clamps for our injectors are nice and tight as well, so I'll come around with a screwdriver, make sure those are nice and tight on all those clamps. The other thing is I'm looking for any loose connections, any connections that are close to metal where they might short out, anything like that, or if anything has worked itself loose. Now some of these old school connectors have these little metal tabs on them, and I'll see if I can back out. The other thing is we want to make sure all of our rubber connections don't have any holes in it. It hasn't suggested that, it hasn't been running rough or anything like that, but one thing that this engine bay desperately needs is a good wipe down. There's a lot of just condensation that's settled on top of the radiator. You know, these hoses are looking grimy. The other thing I want to do is pull off our distributor cap and take a look at our rotor, make sure that looks okay. Again, it's not suggesting that there's any issues when I'm driving it, running just fine, nice and smooth, but I just want to be safe, make sure everything is nice and tight. Our alternator, make sure that's nice and tight, all that good stuff. So let's start, do a little bit of time lapse here, start tightening some of these connections down, making sure everything's nice and secure, check that rotor, all that good stuff. And if we find anything, which I don't think we will, then I will bring it back and give you a good look. So we've got our rotor off, and I'm looking at the terminals on the inside of the rotor. There's a bit of corrosion. I don't know how much that's going to be able to, but it's supposed to be like this. Actually got some like white marks on them, and definitely got the wrong tool here. But if we get some sandpaper, not sand block, sandpaper, we should be able to get in there and kind of rub off some of that corrosion that's on there. Now, it's not a whole lot of corrosion where it's going to affect performance hugely, but we are here, and I want to just kind of clean it off while we're here, make sure we have good contact. So with this, I'm actually cleaning off the top of the rotor, so I'll show you here. You can see the main contact where it comes through the center of the cap, that piece right there in the middle. It's got it spring loaded, so it keeps pressure on this middle tab here, and this is what spins around on the cap. So all I'm doing is taking this block and just kind of cleaning off some of the buildup that's probably happened over these 1,000 miles. Nice shiny surface. You can see it's way shinier in the middle where I've been sanding it versus the end. So I'm doing the same on the end of our rotor. Don't do anything crazy, just want to make sure that we have nice good contact, no buildup on there. And we're going to do that same thing on the underside of the cap because it's that same brass color. We're just going to get some, you know, paper, not this, and make that happen. So let me get that cleaned up, we'll get that put back on, and we'll continue to check. What I think I want to do also is retorque the cylinder heads, because that doesn't hurt. We're going to go in a torque sequence and retorque those, make sure that's all nice and tight still, which I'm sure it is. Just being safe, you know, for this trip coming up. And then we will do a check of our coolant as well. Our coolant bottle doesn't quite fit in the little bracket too, so maybe we can address that. And then make sure on this side, based on the looks of it right now, to tighten everything down just to make sure anything hasn't vibrated loose. And if it has, we'll be able to adjust it. We can start wiping down some of this because it's pretty grimy in here from 1,000 miles of driving. So let me clean up this rotor. We'll check the next set of fluids. So we're going to be torquing our cylinder heads. Now what I've got is an actual shop manual, which I highly recommend you get, nice and bound, all put together. Vick actually has these in stock, but you can actually do everything for your Spider in this manual. Now this is page 101.01, page 10-43. This actually tells us the sequence for our cylinder heads, saying that the final torque will be 61 foot-pounds. But if you look at the picture, it actually starts in the middle, 1, 2, 3, then we crisscross, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now this is the front of the block, this is where the thermostat is, and this is the back towards the car. So we're going to follow the sequence, and since we're not just freshly installing it, we're going to go just in the sequence at the 61 foot-pounds, which I'm sure it will set just fine. So I'm really glad we went through that sequence. Number 7 in this passenger side back corner actually turned maybe about 1/8 of an inch. And this one here in the front, which is actually number 10, actually turned about 1/16 of an inch. So there's a couple that had stretched a little bit. The heat cycles had relaxed them a little bit. So I'm glad we went through that, and they're all nice and tight. There's a couple that were still right at 61 foot-pounds, immediately clicked the torque wrench. So it's a nice, good peace of mind. So the next we're gonna do is actually take off these valve covers. I'm gonna grab my feeler gauge. We're gonna turn the engine over and start filling out these valves, make sure we have our gap set correctly, which I'm sure we're gonna be okay, or relatively close okay, with this over 1,000 miles. So let's pop these open. We're gonna do the pass-through side first, because we got our intake here, but we're gonna do our best to get in there and get a good idea of what we're looking at. So let's get valves and look at our cams. So we've got our valve cover off. Again, now this one tells at the top here, this is page 10-70. This tells us our valve gap. So our clearance on our intake, which is where you guys are, is 0.015 to 0.019. And exhaust, what we've had open here, is 0.018 to 0.021. So what I've got is a feeler gauge. You can pick these up relatively simply, but actually we have our number 3. I'll show you guys here. We have our number 3 at 90 degrees. Now the manual says that the tip of the cam needs to be facing 90 degrees away from the tappet on the bottom there. Now the gap is 0.21 at the maximum, which is this one here. So we're gonna put this underneath and get it going here. So this will clear under the tappet. There's a little, you feel it there. See there's some drag. That's what our clearance is. Now that one clears. Now our test is to go to the next size up. We can do this with one hand. 0.22, there it is. Oh, don't disappear. All right, 0.22. So if it's at 0.21, this should not fit. Yeah, and that doesn't, I just hit a dead stop. So that means that our 0.21, which is the top of our clearance, is within spec, but the next size up does not fit, which is a good sign. So that means that one fits. So we're gonna do the same process on the intake, our exhaust side here. On all these, we gotta get these turned. We're gonna have to turn it by the cam because the crank bolt is covered. So we're gonna turn it here one at a time, do the same test over again to make sure these are all within clearance. Then we'll move on to this side and do those and make sure we're all good there too. After running this measurement on our exhaust side here, number 3 and 4 are right in the middle of spec, perfectly fine. Now these, number 2 and number 1, are a little off. So number 1 is at 0.22, 0.22. Well, spec is 0.21 at the widest. So is that gonna kill it? No, it's just a little bit of a gap, but it's not opening completely to allow the exhaust to escape. Now this one, number 2, is at 0.016. So this one is a little tight. So that means that this one's gonna be opening a little sooner than it probably should. Now what we can do is actually replace the cap on here, this disc. I have a box full of them. And you can actually, there's a tool that I have that will push this down. You can see I can move it. And you can actually pick that disc out and up and replace it with a new one. And we can remeasure. You know, so going from a 0.016 and our spec is between 18 and 21. So it's a 0.003 gap, but is that gonna kill us? It's gonna be running okay right now, but over 1,000 miles, everything's kind of settled in, gotten where it needs to be. So should we change that out? You know, we're right here, we have the tool, we have all the variety pack of discs. I think we should. So we're gonna take one out. We're gonna look at what's in there and see if we can swap it out for a new one and remeasure. You know, in another few hundred miles, we'll try it again. But these come in different increments, so I think they come in 0.005 increments. So for a 0.16, if we add a 5, that'll put us at our top of our gap at 0.012. So would we rather have it too tight or too loose? Well, if it was me, I'd have it a little too loose, because if it's too tight, we're gonna wear out the cam. It's a lot of pressure on that. Additional pressure then is needed. So let's switch these out. I'll get another disc, I'll see what's in here, and we'll swap it out and see what our new gap is and see if we're now better within spec. Again, a little more loose is a little better than a little tight. There's a joke in there somewhere.
That's what she said.
Anyway, let's replace this. So we've got our number 2 down, and we've got our little fork tool here. You see there's some cutouts for the little cup to sit in. So if we play it just right, we should be able to get this in here. It's a little tricky because of that bolt that's there. There we go. If you do it from the back like you're supposed to, then it shouldn't be much of a big deal. Now it's kind of hard to see because of the oil is covering the sides of the cup. Now that tab we had facing forward, so this is going to hold it. So when I go back, take the pressure off, the cup should stay down. All right, so you see the cup stayed down. This is holding all the pressure. So we're gonna take, I need another pick, but we're gonna get that little tab, we're gonna pop that disc out, and we're gonna take a look at what size that is. So you see that popped out. We're gonna grab our magnet, and it should come right out. And we can see our measurement on the back, 3-80. So it was too tight. So we're gonna coat this a little bit, take our magnet, stick it back in there. Oh, or lose it like me.
1 hour later.
So we actually ended up trying that again. So we went from what we had was a 380. We went to a 375, still not enough. And this is a 3.7 or 3-70. This is a 0.20. And that one fits nice and snug. You can see that there. And if we go up to the top of our spec, which is 0.21, does not want to go. So that means that after that adjustment is now into spec. So that one is not tight anymore, which is a nice relief. Of course, we're gonna have to run it for a while, let that kind of break in. That is a new disc on there, so we want to make sure that settles in, and do an evaluation probably in another 1,000 miles, 500 miles, do a check on that. Now this one again, number 1, over here, number 1. So number 1 is already a little big. So we're at a 0.22, I believe I measured on this one, if we pull it around. So it's just slightly outside of spec on the loose side, but we could chase that around again and use our special hook here from Vick's to hold that cup down and change out that as well and get that a little closer than spec. But I'm not going to chase 0.001 to make that okay. So glad we did a check, reevaluate that. Now we are all nice and even, relatively even within spec, and that's all that matters. So now fun part of going where you are and doing the intake side, as we said, the clearance for that is 0.015 to 0.19. So we're just going to do the same process all over again on the intake side. Hopefully we won't have to change out any, but let's button this back up, clean this mating surface so we don't seep out any oil, and move over where you are. It's taken forever, but much needed. Let's do the other side. Everything, holy moly, your screen is dirty. How about now? Any better? looks better. Anyway, all that's put back together. The intake side was well within spec. It was nice to be able to see from this side, so for the future go this way, because you can see the angle much better. Be able to fine tune that 90-degree angle, and everything was right within spec, so we didn't have to change anything on the intake side, which is a relief, because that would have been horrible to get to, because we would have had to take the plenum off, and I mean, where did it take off enough to get to it? It was just a nightmare. Anyway, all good. Next thing is coolant levels, and our coolant overflow bottle, like I said, does not fit very well. It kind of just, you know, casually rests in there. So that's a project for the future. So maybe we got to tighten that band up or something. I would open the radiator cap, but I would have to drop the rear end because the highest point in the system is actually here, where I have this bleeder. I got this off of Amazon, I think. It's a T to help bleed the air out of the system. And we did a coolant video. Need to check that out, how we did that. So there is, kind of see the reflection of coolant in there. Nice and full. See if we can get some color on here. Should be green. Well, not really getting anything, but we're definitely full in there. See that moving around. I think what we should do is we'll just pop the cap a little bit on this side. See what color we get. It should be green. Are we gonna leak? Maybe not. Hey, we're not leaking. All right, nice green color. A little bit of floaties in there. You can see it go into our overflow there. But a little bit of floaties. Nice and full. No air bubbles coming through or anything like that, which is a relief. So that is on there. Nice and, oh, reach for that. Full. So, I think, do a quick once over. Cylinder head's good, fluid's good, valves are good, nice and re-shimmed. That number 2 on the exhaust side. Rotor and cap have been sanded down and cleaned. We were waiting on our bracket for a fuel pressure regulator to dry. We have just painted it black. It was all rust colored. It was pretty ugly. So I just shot some black on that, and that's going on there. Now, some people have asked me what pressure regulator I have for the fuel. And this is actually off of Amazon, I believe. It was relatively inexpensive, but just word to the wise. To use this, you're going to need to put some fuel resistant thread tape on the threads because it will leak. But once you do that, I haven't had an issue, and again, 1,000 miles, haven't had an issue in it. I'll put a link down in the description for this one because some people have seen it in other videos and say, hey, where'd you get that? Where'd you find that? My factory one had actually given up on me, so that's why I replaced this one. Plus it has a gauge on it so I can precisely measure how much fuel pressure I'm putting in there. So, I think we've checked everything off the box. I can't think of anything else. If there's something that I should have checked that you guys are thinking of that I haven't checked yet, put it down in the comments down below and I'll come back and double check it because I think I've covered everything. But knowing me, I probably forgot one thing. So I think the next thing is, I'm not necessarily going to detail the engine bay because we are going to drive it all the way up to Dallas. It's about a 3-hour drive from where I am. And then we'll clean it right before the open house. But I think what we should do is take some high grit sandpaper and I'll try, you know, a body panel on a corner somewhere to see if I can wet sand it. It's kind of hard to tell here, but I think you just kind of could hear it. Yeah, it's pretty rough and it's pretty foggy. I have buffed this once and it came out to this. It used to be a lot more dull, more like this is what it was originally when we pulled it out from those trees. So I'm gonna try a little section, you know, maybe, well, this is a little shinier down here. See where the sun is just eating it. But I'll find a spot, maybe back here, or I don't know. I have to find a spot. Maybe back behind the fender. Because I would love to, because this is really coarse there too. But, I don't know, maybe I'm getting too ambitious wanting to wet sand that, because if I wet sand one spot, I'm going to have to do the whole car. And if I wet sand some of it, is it too thin? And I start going through the paint. If you start going through the paint, then you might as well just do the whole thing, go through where it needs to go through, and then you end up body filler and actually painting the darn thing, and I'm trying to avoid that, at least right now. I'm not opposed to painting it. I know we did the 850, but man, that was just a lot of work, and I'm not really wanting to do that again, at least not yet. At least until the, you know, the bus gets finished. When the bus gets finished, I'll be more inclined to do body work on this thing. But I don't know, it's like a fine line. Do we go for it? Just try a little section and see how it comes out? I don't know. Again, you tell me. Comments down below. Should we go for a wet sand and see what we come up with? Because we can always do a separate video on that as well. So, I think I've covered it all. Nothing on the interior. All the gauges work just fine. Just needs a good vacuum and a wash. Our lower grille, I do have it back here, has a lot of brakes in it. So it rattles like an old tin can, and it's absolutely horrible. You sit at a stoplight and you're idling, you just hear the brrrr of this thing over and over and over again. It's really embarrassing because people are looking at you for the wrong reason. They should want to look at you because, wow, look at that car, not because, wow, that thing is noisy. So we have it off for now, but again, at the open house, we're going to pick up a new one and replace it. That way it's not so annoying. All right, guys, that's going to be the end of this episode. We are done with our 1,000-mile checkup after our 1982 Fiat 124 build, and not too bad. Quite happy with it. It actually ended up being a good prep for our weekend trip here next weekend for the Vick Auto Open House on April 29th, 2023. Very excited to go and drive this up there. Everything seems to check out just fine. Just a couple tune-up things here and there, and a good systems check. So I'm really excited to drive this thing all the way up to Dallas. I've gone a couple little short trips around town, about 2 hours or so, and didn't have any issues, so I really think going all the way to Dallas will be just fine. Now, I really hope to see you guys there at this open house. If you can't come, I will be doing a live stream for about 30 minutes or so, maybe 45 minutes, maybe even an hour. Just depends on how engaged people are, but make sure you guys tune into that. I will put a more specific time as we get closer to it, but it will be on that Saturday, the 29th. Probably around 11 or noon. That's kind of what I'm feeling as people start rolling in and we get to take a good look at the cars and maybe even talk to some of the people. It's gonna be a really good time, and I'm glad you guys can come with me. It's gonna be super exciting. So make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Subscribing really, really helps the channel, helps us continue to grow so we can work on cars like these and finish other projects like the bus, like that one. So again, thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And until next time being live in person, which is really exciting. Can't wait to do that. I'm very pumped, can you tell? We'll see you.